Welcome everyone to this talk with Jake Rendle-Worthington. I pronounced it proper, right? Okay. So Jake's from elephantCREW, and a bit about Jake. Jake has lived with, worked with, played and studied animals all his life, growing up on experimental regenerative farms and rewilding projects. He chose a career path in animal care, working in wild spaces and private reserves across Europe and Africa. He graduated with a Master of Science in Animal Behavior and took a more practical than academic career trajectory. With his mother, they developed cooperative teaching, a humane methodology of working with large animals based on developmental psychology, learning theory, and practical experience. Jake applies his knowledge and approach in all his work as a leader of a Zimbabwean charity, elephantCREW, and as volunteer director for the UK charity, We Are All Mammals. His main interest lies in utilizing behavioral sciences in combination with practical experience to improve the lives of non-human animals and develop mutually beneficial human-animal relation. In doing so, Jake hopes to find new ways of improving welfare and conservation objectives through an evidence-based approach. So you've come all the way down here to give this talk to us. Thank you for being here, Jake. And you'll be talking, your title will be Pioneering New Techniques in Wildlife Conservation and Animal Welfare. Yeah, so take it away.
Great, thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me here. It's great to be visiting University of Queensland in this particular department here. So yes, my name is Jake Rendle-Worthington. I am an animal behavior specialist, and I am the project leader of elephantCREW. We have been through quite a process of understanding who we are and what we are over the last few years, as we were basically the elephants that we look after basically came from a tourist operation, and were used in elephant-backed safaris. The people that owned them wanted to get away from that, so they started engaging with me, and the elephants were put into a charitable trust so that nobody could be accused of profiting from them, but also wanted to work out what the best way forward for these particular elephants were. We developed a new tourist activity, much more educational, immersive type activity, and we launched that bang on the first weekend of lockdown of COVID. So that was somewhat frustrating. Nevertheless, we spent the next, gosh, how long has it been? Almost 3 years now, trying to work out who we are, how we're trying to impact conservation and animal welfare, and being based in Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, which is in the middle of what is called the Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area. We are in an area where there's lots of human beings and there's lots of elephants. So that obviously throws up lots of interesting challenges. So elephantCREW has a vision of an Africa in which elephants and humans coexist in a balanced environment. That's where we're trying to get to, and obviously being based where we are, that's a very, very current issue with elephants and humans sharing the same space. Myself, as an animal behavior specialist, I really come from a much more welfare science type background, although I have worked in conservation in many different places. So I'm just going to give you a short introduction into welfare science and how we've come to start thinking about welfare of other animals. Some of you may have heard of a place called the Battersea Dogs Home in the UK. So that, in combination with this first book here, Black Beauty, they occurred in the 19th century. People started to think about the welfare of other animals. Black Beauty is a book about the trials and tribulations of a very beautiful black horse who was used in various different ways throughout his lifetime. Some good, some bad, but it was the first book to really sort of tell the story from the horse's point of view. Later in the 60s, books like Ruth Harrison's Animal Machines and Peter Singer's Animal Liberation really sort of catapulted animal welfare into the public consciousness in a way that helped develop what is now modern animal welfare science. And what are we talking about when we talk about animal welfare science? Well, confusingly, we're talking about the conscious subjective experience of emotions. It's what we're ultimately concerned about when we consider human and animal welfare. That's Michael Mendel, who's an ethologist. So we're really trying to quantify and understand something that is really the most subjective possible thing that we could, which is a subjective conscious experience. We all have them, and we assume that other beings do, but it's a very hard thing to sort of quantify that in scientific terms. So in terms of the evolution of welfare science, back in the 60s, it was really about, can the animal cope? Or earlier than the 60s, even, can the animal cope with their situation? You know, are they able to survive in that situation? Then the question started getting asked, does the animal have their needs met? I'm sure many of you may have heard of the 5 freedoms. I'm not going to repeat them because I always get them muddled up, but that was an attempt to answer that question. Do they have their needs met? And so it was something that was born of something called the Farm Animal Welfare Council in the UK. They basically came up with 5 things like freedom from hunger, freedom from pain and disease, pain and suffering, freedom to express normal patterns of behavior, to answer that question. But it wasn't a very scientifically thought through thing. Nowadays, I guess people might turn to the 5 domains, which attempts to put a much more scientific, methodical method onto looking at these different aspects of an animal's life to understand how they are. But they all boil down to, at the end, what our assumption about the mental impact of the environment, of the physical condition, those things will have. What I'm really interested in, and I think which is what is really at the spearhead of animal welfare thinking, is, does the animal able to have a high quality of life? Not are we just managing to prevent cruelty, are we managing to provide what they need, but are they having a really good life? So how do you start thinking about how an animal feels about the world, or about how another species or another being or another human being feels about the world? Well, I always feel it's good place to start is with our similarities. So when we look at, this is obviously an elephant and this is a human, we both have a brain. This brain is connected to a spinal cord. The spinal cord is connected to nerves, and the nerves pick up messages about our bodies and about how we sense the world and transfer it all back to our brain through the spinal cord. So, and we have 5 senses like an elephant as well. So we can assume that there's certain things about the world that we can interpret in the same way as an elephant would. However, there are differences in how the brain functions and the size of it, how the morphology of it. So if we look at, for instance, the cerebellum in an elephant, down here, it's very large. In a human, it's a lot smaller proportionately. So in a human, it's something like 10% of the total brain mass is the cerebellum. In an elephant, it's somewhere between 18 to 19% of total brain mass is the cerebellum. What does that mean? Well, what we know about the cerebellum is it is a lot to do with motor movement and control of the body and stuff like that, which for an elephant is very important because not only are they very big, but you see this thing here. Does anybody know what that is? It's the trunk. Well done. That trunk has 40,000 muscles in it. In fact, if we just go back, this nerve ending, which comes into the brain from the trunk, is slightly larger than the spinal cord. So there's a lot of control needed to make, this is an elephant called Hwangi, be able to control her trunk to make it twist like that. There's no bones in there, it's just muscle. To give you a sense of proportion, your body probably has about 600 or 700 muscles in it in total. So there's a lot more to control. That's why an elephant brain has a larger cerebellum proportionately. So these are the things we need to start putting conditions on our anthropomorphism to be able to get to really understanding what another animal is experiencing about the world. And some people call it critical anthropomorphism. My preference is conditional anthropomorphism. And again, looking at hearing ranges. So different animals have different hearing ranges. Humans hear between 30 hertz to 20 kilohertz roughly. And that overlaps with a lot of animals, including elephants. But elephants will actually hear much lower infrasonic sounds. So when we're thinking about how elephants are interpreting the world, we start to have to think, oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there we can't actually see or hear that they are detecting as well. Obviously, with technology, we can detect those lower, deeper sounds in certain ways, but it's, you know, we don't have that technology on us all the time. So we have to realize that there is other explanations for things happening. What it does mean, though, in my work, because I work very much directly with elephants, is elephants can hear what humans are saying, as long as we're not going too high-pitched. So being able to talk to elephants and utilize our voices when you're working closely with them is very useful. It's not going to work with a bat, though, because they're way out of our vocal range. So another way in which welfare and conservation interact, which I think is a really important one, and I think is emerging a little bit more, particularly within the science, is how we can utilize what is a welfare issue as an indicator of a conservation issue. So I don't know if any of you know, but a few years back, there was in 2020, September 2020, obviously, there was a lot of elephants dying in Botswana. Hundreds and hundreds. Just aerial surveys kept on picking up dead elephants all over the place in certain areas. Which is, if you've got lots of dying animals in an area, it indicates that there's an issue with the population. Could be disease, could be poisoning, could be some environmental factor that is preventing them expand or into the areas they need to. And with this particular situation, I'm not sure that they ever really got to the bottom of it. There was talk of cyanobacteria in water holes, potential disease spread. It wasn't really certain, but what we do know is there's certain restrictions on the movements of elephants in Botswana. There's fences. There was also, controversially, a big ban on hunting in Botswana up until this point. And after that point, or around this point, because of a change in government, hunting was allowed again because it became a very political issue. A lot of people living indigenously in Botswana were saying there were too many elephants. and it was destroying their livelihoods. And this is the area in which I work, an area where there's this area in Botswana is part of the CASA TFCA, so it's linked to where I am. This is a problem that's getting bigger and bigger. Is this humans living side by side with elephants and coming into conflict with them? So that really, for us as an organization, is the biggest wild elephant welfare problem that needs to be addressed, which also obviously has a big conservation impact. So here we have, this is a project we work on. So as it said there, we have completed the fence. However, in the last 3 months, elephants are very clever animals, and they've managed to break through it constantly, despite it being a 2.5 meter, 10,000 volt fence. So we're actually now having to seek funding to try and build a further defense, which is another type of elephant fence, which is particularly designed to prevent elephants getting in. And when it comes to all these things, that you need to have layers of defense to prevent elephants getting into places, because they are very, very intelligent beings which will figure things out given enough time. Obviously, you saw those very challenging footage of elephants actually eating trash, and the elephants are actually getting that trash into their bellies. And we've had a number of incidents in Victoria Falls where people have actually been killed by elephants that are obviously so uncomfortable by the trash that they've become very antagonistic and aggressive nearby the dump site. And what happens if a person gets killed by an elephant, usually what happens, the authorities get called in and they shoot the elephant. And with those elephants that had been shot in that situation, the autopsy showed that the stomachs were just absolutely crammed full of plastic and all kinds of other rubbish and detritus. So, plastics gets everywhere, as we know. Oh, sorry. So coming back to what the difference between welfare and conservation is. Welfare is really about the individual, where conservation is about the species, but it's the impacts on the individual that can show whether the species is in a healthy space, the population of the species in a particular given area. So as an organization, elephantCREW, we're trying to impact conservation and coexistence of elephants and humans in Victoria Falls. And we do that through what is our CREW methodology. So CREW is an acronym for Community, Research, Education and Welfare. And what there's the bedrock for all of this is our ambassador herd. So we have 9 elephants that, as I said before, they previously did elephant-back safaris, but they can't necessarily be released into the wild. We have released 2. We did have more elephants, but we didn't release them. They released themselves. We're in a very unique situation where we have elephants under human care sharing the same space as elephants that are free roaming. And 2 of the elephants that we used to have showed signs that they were going to amalgamate back into wild populations and be okay in the wild environment, free roaming environment. The big worry about elephants that have had this type of lifetime experience is they are the ones that are more likely to come into contact with humans and therefore conflict with humans, and forced, what I would say is forced releases of elephants of this type of situation have usually been very, very unsuccessful, to the detriment of both humans and elephants. So one of the ways we aid local communities is to help them with mitigation measures for keeping elephants out of their crop fields. This is obviously a big thing. Where we are in Zimbabwe, there is more and more people utilizing what was traditionally wild habitat for their own agricultural use. Small farmers, subsistence farmers, but because of growing populations, they're just pushing further and further into wild areas. So this is a maize field here. This is the main staple crop in Zimbabwe. This has been, we're just inspecting this field after it had been damaged by a wild elephant. Now, in order to help these guys are the villagers here. In order to help these guys, we can go and give them chili training, is one of the things, which is what these things are. There's a chili brick and there's a chili fence down there, and this smolders overnight. However, what you have to understand is the way in which people in these communities view elephants is very different from probably those of us that don't live next to elephants view them. And it's complex. They're very much ingrained into their culture and folk knowledge, but also there's the reality of living next to an enormous creature, you know, which can easily squash you. And the reality also that enormous creature, when it's shot and skinned, there's a great big pile of meat. So that's a great big boon for a community. If they end up needing to kill an elephant, they end up getting a lot of meat. And this is the scene that I was confronted with when we went into this particular village to give them training in these mitigation measures. There's a elephant femur and shoulder blade, dog gnawing on it, lots of elephant meat hanging up for biltong. And my first thought was, do these guys really want to keep elephants out of their fields, or are they quite happy to let them in so they can shoot them? Because obviously there's a big benefit there for them. So what we've done, and this is kind of a bit of an accident, what we've done with our guest activity, because we launched it on the first weekend of lockdown, we wanted to keep all the team practiced and the elephants habituated and comfortable with what was going on. So we invited through community groups and school groups, and we found that this did three things. It enabled perception change. We found that these guys were coming out after our guest activity going, oh, elephants are more like humans than I thought. Oh, yeah, we love elephants. Elephants are actually really nice. Saying things like this. Knowledge uptake, because we get across a whole lot of information that they don't get about elephants otherwise. You know, not just how big they are and how much food they eat and, you know, how heavy their dung is, but stuff like how they utilize, how their cognitive abilities are, what their social structures like, how they show their emotions, to change that perception away from just a big inanimate animal, or not inanimate, but big unsentient being, to a sentient being, something that they can relate to. And then we introduced these chili techniques and other beehives and stuff like that as elephant deterrents for getting into crop fields. So, you know, it's a win for us once these community groups have been through, and they say all this stuff about how much they like elephants, but then they go, those chili things, can you come and show us how they work? That means we've got an invite into their community to show them how to adopt these techniques and help them live more peacefully side by side with elephants.
We took some pictures closer to them, and they taught us how to live, and it was elephants. I still remember what the elephant was carrying up. I don't know whether I still alive.
It's a nice name, Kariba.
Yeah, Kariba.
You might relate.
About Kariba, I thought it was Kariba.
Yeah.
So they taught us how to live, how to live. Because to us, we take those animals as a problem to us. Because they would destroy our people. But when we started teaching us how to do some shielding, so that we build finite, so that we stay anything for it. Because this year, many people have it. That's what I can say.
So it depends on the size. The thing that you want to learn. There is one chili, but two different parts. So this, then you mold it. This is oil, then you mold it. Any shape that you want.
This guy's a community guardian, so he's actually employed. He's a member of the community, and he's actually employed to act as a go-between between wildlife and the community, and alert the community when there's a wildlife issue, maybe lions coming into the village or something like that.
Then you come here, so your wire or your string, you hang it up like this, up down to that side. What we realize when we are doing the time of harvest, you can see around here, that is the area of elephants. Some people come here, and they feed around here. I can show you the elephant down that side and you see design. And then my test goes up down that side. Then you walk around here. I have to bring you the this is the elephant calling. That's how it comes. This is one. Yeah, this one.
So that's obviously our community work. I'm just going to rush through these last few quickly. So what we're doing is having a genuine impact on local communities being able to live side by side with elephants, and it's having a genuine impact on their welfare and the welfare of the elephants, because then this conflict is lessened. This is part of our research program. This is just one research project we're involved in with the University of Georgia and the GIS department there. They were actually wanting to develop a machine learning program to identify elephants from their footprints, because elephants have individual footprints like we have individual fingerprints. So with our elephants, we're able to work with them in a way that allows us to get detailed information about them as individuals and share that with those guys from the University of Georgia. So we obviously have a very unique situation with our elephants. We can do very close-up stuff with them. I haven't got it here, got it on this slideshow, but I do have a video of us doing dentistry with a conscious elephant, and actually using an electric drill on their tusk without the need of heavy restraints. The elephant was sedated, but he wasn't unconscious, and it means that's a lot less dangerous situation for the elephant. And the elephant is also able to sort of think through what has happened to its tusk and not wake up with a strange new appendage or something missing. We've done lots of welfare work with the University of Nottingham. They have a elephant welfare group, specialist group there, particularly in changes in our overnight management of our elephants and how we make sure that they've got everything they need and are able to exhibit a much more sort of natural level of behaviors over night time, because we have to have them contained within an area overnight because it's an open park to other wildlife. So we have to provide them with various stuff overnight to keep them busy and happy and able to go through a normal circadian rhythm for an elephant. The RVC, we've had various students from, so you can see with the University of Vienna, there's elephant communication work we've done. University of Bridgewater's another bit of work involving elephant noises elephants make and their calls. University of Georgia has talked about. University of Wuppertal, we have somebody coming out to study the wild elephants as well as our elephants. What we aim to do, and we have already to a certain degree, is a fully accessible research camp for anybody that wants to research anything about wild or elephants in human care in a kind of macro and micro way, because you can have access, you can do all kinds of things with our elephants that you can't with either zoo elephants in this part of the world, but also wild elephants, obviously. So for instance, one thing that we did, one paper we published, was to do with heart rate and certain activities. So we were able to put heart rate monitors onto our elephants and see how the heart rate changed when the elephant was involved in various activities, whether it was doing their own thing in the bush with a handler or with a guest, being ridden or not. We actually found that elephants really don't like walking downhill when it's raining. That was one thing that really knocks their heart rate up. Then our education program, which is the same as our guest activity, but it's obviously aimed at children. We subsidize through the money we bring in from guests to bringing children out to us, doing the guest activity, which otherwise would be inaccessible to them. And these are all children that live in target communities. So they're all living in areas where they're living side by side with elephants, essentially, and helping them from an early stage in their life have a sort of more positive view of elephants, and also understand how to behave around elephants. You know, it is a hazard for these kids walking home from school that they might get squashed by an elephant. So being able to understand how to pass an elephant in the bush without disturbing them is something else that we help them with. And we also do an ethogram exercise to help hopefully inspire one or two to become behavioral scientists or conservationists. So far we've had over 1,000 children through on that, and 150 community members, and also we do placements for local university students. Finally, welfare. Obviously, welfare is at the core of what we do. Welfare of our elephants is our first priority, and to that aim, with the charity that I'm connected with in the UK, we developed a set of standards for the management and welfare of elephants in human care in Southern Africa. There's around about 300 or 400 elephants in Southern Africa in similar-ish situations to how we have them, involved in various tourist activities, or there's release programs. There's various different reasons why these elephants have ended up in human care. I'm not going to go into now, but there's a variety of reasons. This was a multi-stakeholder initiative involving international welfare and behavior experts and ethologists, local welfare NGOs and wildlife veterinarians, and then obviously the elephant facilities themselves, their managers and some of their carers. So really trying to bring the science to the practicalities and the practicalities back to the science, and coming up with a really meaningful set of standards that genuinely impacts welfare, uplifts welfare of all these elephants, and hopefully gives a bit of confidence of visiting places that do go by these sets of standards, that they're visiting somewhere where the welfare of the animals comes first. We as elephantCREW are the first organization to actually pass this set of standards. That just happened recently, as we've just been through a long period of developing the protocols around inspection. And this is how at elephantCREW we look at, it's a very iterative process, looking at the welfare of elephants, monitoring them and improving it. And it really has two big inputs: behavioral observations, so very much a more scientific way of looking at the welfare of elephants, and then carer feedback, which is in many ways much more detailed, because they are with the elephants all day, every day. So that allows us to see what's happening, where there's problems, where things need to be made to improve, implement, and then go back again. So I better finish now because I've run over slightly, but that's us as an organization, and hopefully it gives you a bit of an idea of how we're impacting conservation and welfare, not only of our elephants, but of elephants across Southern Africa that are kept in human care, and also elephants in the wild. And further to that, the humans that live side by side with these elephants, their welfare is of importance as well. Without getting that right, the whole thing falls apart. So we're very much adhering to the concept of One Health, and the CREW methodology is how we make that work for us as elephantCREW. These are our social media websites, and there's a donation page for the welfare standards there, yeah, please get in contact if you want to hear any more. Otherwise, now's a good time to ask me some questions.